Everyone, sorry it's a little late. JJ had to run out really quick, and he won't be back for the rest of the class. And thankfully, yet, so I was next door, and Darcy asked me to come in and fill in for the rest of the class. So, and remember me, my name's Carson. I was here a while ago to sub for a class. It's good to see you all again. Further in now, so things are starting to warm a little bit more difficult, a little bit more interesting, probably. So we're talking or a little bit more of note. I'm sure you've seen a little bit so far. Right, that we were doing file. Does anyone have any questions on the cool? A little bit right. Last exercise was about writing to a file. If you want to persist stuff to the disk, but it does one thing that it's kind of got a negative, which is if you content to that file, to the file again, you've overwritten everything that once was there. So it blows it away and puts your new content in the file. Maybe you want to continue to add to a file over and over again. So you're building a database, or you just need a list of stuff, whatever. Sometimes writing over and over isn't what you want to do. Read everything from the file, manipulate it in memory, do all this stuff. It'd be kind of hard to manage all of the content in the file. So there's another function called append file. And append file is pretty sweet, because as you could imagine, it's going to append to an existing file as opposed to destroy it and rewrite to the file. So we have a little example code right here and explain it. There's comments to kind of help if it's not so intuitive. Does anyone want to take a shot at trying to explain this for the class? No one? Well, I'll go ahead and you want to give a shot? No, absolutely. Come up and
I don't know actually why we say variable fs all the time, but that's what we always do, so we're going to do that continuously. We set variable fs to grab the package to read and write everything. We're going to set this variable text file equal to the user input. It's 2 because that's the user input. And then we need to get this file, whatever we're doing, expertly named append file. Make sure it's in the camel case or it won't work. I've done that many a times where I'll capitalize A. It has to be in camel case. Very simple. It's just going to add Hello Kitty there a bunch of times, which is going to be great. Going to check if it breaks. This is our check if it breaks function. So that content is added. Technically, this is the only line that's really doing anything. These are just letting us know if it broke or if it worked. So really, line 9 is the line that we focus on.
Awesome.
I don't know. Technically, we don't need this, but it makes it look not disgusting. So we can just write text file in there instead of writing process arg2 again and again and again, which I do all the time. So don't do that.
Very nice. Thank you. Let's give him a hand. All right, so let's unpack that a little bit more. So there's a couple things he had questions on, right? So why do we write var fs? Require the fs package.
Modules or modules from the FS library, like we do on line 9, and we need FS to do something.
We are unpacking the package, like you said, right? That's exactly what we're doing, but we have to do something with it. We have to assign it to a variable so we can use it, right? Why FS? Okay, well, you can make it anything you want, right? Yeah. It's a variable.
I know, it's just... So are you?
We do it FS because it's an FS package, right?
Everybody online uses FS, so I don't think it's the thing we do. I don't know.
It's good to name the variable the same as the package name as close as you can get. So because it's called FS, calling the variable FS, it's just best practice. But did you have a question?
Yeah, are you creating text file then based on whatever you pass into Node?
Yeah, so right here where we have process.argv2, that is the first user.
Path
Yeah, that is the path of the file, but that's going to be after the path of the node file, right?
Yeah.
So we have node and then the
That's
file.
the first thing you can pass in.
Yes, this is the
So
first
you're
thing you can pass in.
creating text file. To?
Well, we're writing the path to the file. We haven't created anything yet.
Okay.
But this is just, hey, this is the path, the name of that file, right? So this could be text.txt or whatever, and it would be like, okay, that's going to be the path we're going to use. So wherever my working directory is, we're going to create that file when I do append file. And then we just set it to a variable because it is a little cleaner to set it to a variable. It's a little easier to remember. You can use process.argv2 index2 if you want, text file once. But when you got to use it a lot, you know, it is a little bit cleaner, a little easier to use a variable that's easy to remember, right? We do that there, kind of a best practice thing. And then line 9, you know, this is the meat. File's cool because, you know, we're not just appending to a file. We can create it on the fly with append files. So it's a little safer than some operations in that regard. I'm pretty sure write can create it on the fly too. But again, it overwrites stuff, right? So append file is like, we're going to keep working with this file, might as well use that. And then right here, you can see the first argument, text file. That's just the path to the file we want to create or append to. Hello Kitty is the text we are appending to that file. So if it doesn't exist, it's the only text that's going to be in there. If it does exist, that's going to be at the end of the file. And then here's your callback. Are we all familiar with callbacks now? Getting there? You know, we can determine if something went wrong, or we can determine if it worked. And if it worked, we're going to go ahead and console log that. So I'm going to run this really quick as an example. And while I'm running it, my file list right there, and hopefully like it creates everything and we're good. So we can do node, and then we have to give it a name. So we'll call it kitty .txt. Created it, content added, we're all good. We can see it over here. Perfect, that was beautiful. But what if I run it like a bunch of times? Hello Kitty, hello Kitty, hello Kitty, hello Kitty, all the way. Every time I've added it, it didn't destroy anything, it just kept appending to it.
So if you're writing JavaScript
into this file?
Can you manipulate that text any other way than it just copy paste, copy paste, copy paste? Like, could you create a new line?
Like this? Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it is the \n. That's what's called the escape character for a new line. That way, you can have it add a break, a line break. It's actually called line feed to the kitty text. So if we go ahead and run it again, we'll get a little bit different output. Oh no. Change and then something, right? And process that is Visual Studio Code automatically copying stuff. So, okay. So, does anyone else have any questions on this append file and how the append file function works different to write file, how you would use it, format to the read file and the write file? So, at this point, could the TA slack out this file? I'm going to show what we're going to do is we're going to, now that we know how append file works and that it exists, a little application that's kind of like bank almost, where you can run a deposit and check a total and withdraw and stuff like that. I'm just going to show you what that output is supposed to look like, and then the TAs will slack out the the unsolved file, and you can all work together. This is a partner activity for the next 30 minutes to try to figure out how to get it to work. So I have this bank.js you see right here. Bank.js, and we can go ahead and deposit, and we can deposit 5. Deposited 5, all right? And then we can go ahead and check our total. We have a total of 33.81. Now, what's been happening, I know I just deposited 5, so it's kind of like a weird output. But this bank.txt is the file that's holding all of. So there was stuff in there already, and then I added 5 at the end. Again, as a 10, and you'll see this file auto copied because Visual Studio Code is funky sometimes. And now my total's gonna be crazy different. Oh no, there you go. I just added the 10. So there you go. Like we have this file. We're gonna manipulate it. There's a deposit. There's a total, which checks the total, right? Deposit, and then the amount you want to deposit. There is a withdraw. 10. Withdrew 10. We can go ahead and run the total again. It's changed back. A lotto. Sorry, you lost 25 cents. Maybe you should get a job instead. So that one just kind of does some random stuff. This will buy a lottery ticket, and you'll either lose 25 cents or you'll gain $2. So it's going to be random number generator, however you decide to do that, right? But those are your 4 functions. Again, we have deposit with the amount you want to deposit. We have a total. We have a withdraw with the amount you want to withdraw. And then we have a lotto, which costs 25 cents or you win $2. All right, any questions on that? Work together, work in groups. TAs, if you could slack out that assignment for everyone. And you got 30 minutes.
You keep running that, it just.
Oh, yeah, what you can do is switch it.
Yeah, we needed to.
Wrong.
So,
We'll do that wrong.
so I wanted to go to the file. Well, no, actually, I never read file. Right, it'll be like for every bit of the loop. Making progress. File, I need to read that. Yeah, operate. Alright, so is that well, yeah, the I'm just trying to do right now is add the file. Yeah, you also need to figure out what that is. So to actually right now is about this number. I need to add yes. So, generally, like the practice that have saying, okay, I have
Yeah, we'll change FS append file, yeah. We could create a folder
I think I'm not. Add everything together inside of it. That was the idea here, right? Just write one and then generate one. And you go really good setup. It's really easy to it's really oh no. Just separating the it's going to be oh yeah, so yeah.
Maybe this needs to be.
You're all doing the same. Run this program.
Yeah, I think I need to create yeah.
Basically for like case and pasta, these
Yeah. Yeah. Taking that random guy. Yeah, you can just create a random guy. Yeah, yeah. So have you got a text sheet? Every line you go it says
Well, before that. I want to start with one. So we want to look at
what is the value that we
Now we're gonna have to actually read the file. Read it. We have to read it.
That's why I can't read it.
Don't feel sorry.
Well, they just affected it, right? How do we get So we do these well-line arguments. It was right? So how do you get one of those arguments from that well-line? Where does it good to go from the so back to this, right? That's not good. How you get you have a new program. You back up? You're on the line right now. So yeah, the process of being like how do we get
So what I would use throughout, what I don't understand, so we have a text file, right? So we're looking at the
It sounded like we adding to like see the numbers right there. Yeah, I guess aggregating, but I think for that you're just adding to it. To subtract, you're gonna need to create an array, and you're gonna need to.
You want to be
Oh yeah. And then
so that way you
that would be
so now.
yeah, that's what I have been. But I could have done it. Couple of numbers and then add it. Yeah. I just
That's gonna change also.
Yeah, so like the read file. Yeah. So data's part of that. He always looks for that. Like you need.
It's already.
That's part of the error, is part of it. That's how they.
We build an array.
So the way that they have this function
Putting in
But the value.
I'll do interesting reason what they put in. Clearly not.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what's in.
I make it.
Were you confused about like why?
Yeah. So what do you want to happen? Yeah, because usually I'm running this it, but I went to the. No, well, yeah, I went to the quality party. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I walked in.
I was like, I usually don't know what they were. But every once in a while. Yeah. I'll give it
It's way too long.
Trying to get into this.
This is like the same, like, here I just walk around. Then I paid off.
Oh, you did the yeah.
No.
That's, yeah, that's not extra.
But I
Yeah, but you'll be able to think about it.
It does, it's just understanding. Oh, like So parts of data. Don't get too crazy. Because that's those are all easy. You take those out. He's gone. I've learned that if I write it again. Do it. You coach back, Sean will be like, whoa. Yeah, that's why I see the best stack over. Someone posts terrible code, and someone's like, no, it's not like whatever. All right. So we're just going over yeah. Have you ever been there just Can't even remember what the was this one. I have a number of jobs for I've had it. There's a website All right, I gotta get the next thing back. I believe. It shouldn't be that hard. It's like weird.
It's like the hardest part. So that's always gonna be.
Well, that's usually
This is always gonna be one. Oh, you should do this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's.
So will they use, so am I ever gonna use the word required, or am I gonna do my business or not?
It's the same, it's allowed to
Otherwise,
because this is a whole other.
wants to be.
There's a whole bunch of things behind
So you're good here.
Stack them.
right here, I'm saying that FS is part of the fire. What exactly does it say? Like, set this down.
Okay, so.
If you get out of right
Well, I have no room. I can just.
All right, we're gonna go over this now. I know not everyone probably finished. This was a really hard one, but we should talk about it a little bit so we can get the last assignment done. When one of the TAs gets back to their machine, could they slack out the solve file for me? Thank you. All right, Catherine's going to slack out the solve file and then take like a moment to just read through the solved code before we talk about it and kind of like compare it to what you have, see maybe some of the places that were hard to figure out, and just try to like get a feel for it a little bit, and then we'll talk about it, okay?
We could make a function file. Yeah. Make a function and then we just have a single parameter.
All right, let's talk about this code now. Did everyone get a chance to kind of look at it a little bit since we slacked out the solution? Yes? No? Well, we're going to talk about it so we can go ahead and move on. We have a couple more activities we want to do before the end of class. Starting from the top, going down. Var fs equals require fs. We're all familiar with that now, right? That's requiring in the file system module, the fs module. And why do we call it fs, our variable? Because it matches the package name. It's just a best practice, you know, nothing fancy there. So it's a good thing to do. Just like in the last example with the pen file, we have stuff coming out of the command line that we're going to use in this file further down, right? So we have an action, which is like the transaction type, deposit, lotto, withdraw. And then we have a value, which may not necessarily exist for everything. So that's why it's probably a better idea to make that the last parameter. See, it's index 3 versus index 2 for the action. And we're setting those both the variables again because it's really easy to just use a well-named variable like action or transaction or something as opposed to the process.argv at some index. You know, it's just a lot to type. And then next step is we have our action. We know what we're going to do. We can verify that the action the user entered is a legitimate action that we can go ahead and use. So we have 4 actions in a switch statement. You could have also used an if-else statement. If-else is effectively a switch, but it's a little bit different, and it's a little bit more work, you know, to do a bunch of if-elses. So that's why we prefer the switch when we have a lot of these repeating cases. So first case, total amount. This is probably could be considered maybe one of the simpler ones. I don't know. They all had a lot of difficult functionality in them. But you only had to use read file for this one. You didn't have to write to the file too. So you get a bunch of text back, right? You use read file, reading through your bank text. You're telling it the encoding UTF-8. Does anyone know what that means? UTF-8, it's the Unicode character set. Yeah, it's just generally defining a pretty well-known character set that almost everyone uses. Most web pages are UTF-8. Most OSs are UTF-8 or UTF-16 or something like that by default. So UTF-8 is just a good encoding, and you can pretty much guarantee your text files are going to be in that. And then we have our callback after we read that file. If we have an error, obviously, you can't continue. There's a problem. Otherwise, did anyone notice that bank.txt has a comma and a space before each value, aside from the first one, right? On that comma space so that you can get all of the values out as numbers, and you can put them in this data array. So you can go ahead and use that. Yeah, you have a question?
What if you just did comma and then
if you just did comma and no space, so technically you'd still get all the numbers out, but they'd have a space in front of them. So determining, depending on how you parse the integer, it may or may not work. Now, parse float, I think, doesn't care about the space. It'll just be like, it's a space. But it's possible that something won't. I can't tell you off the top of my head if parse float will work with a space or not. So that's something to keep in mind. A good practice when you're parsing strings, especially if you just want to do that, is to always trim, right? So I have a string, and I know I'm going to convert it to a number. It's good practice to trim it before I convert it to the number, and that gets rid of any extra space that might cause problems on the outsides of the string, the beginning and the end, right? Space in the middle, still a problem, but shouldn't be an issue if you're delimited by a comma. So we split by the comma and the space. We have a result here that we're going to try to sum up. We go through all of the numbers in our data array. We convert them to a parse to a float if we can. And if we can, so this is where your space comes into play. If you can't, it's just never going to add anything. You'll get 0 for your total always. Otherwise, we'll take that parsed float and we'll go ahead and append it to the result. We'll do a sum, right? The plus equals. Does everyone know what the plus equals means? Remember that one? Result equals result plus whatever. And then we'll go ahead and console log our final result. And the 2 fixed here means we're going to round that number to 2 decimal places. So you could do 2 fixed 10, whatever. We're probably not going to go much further than 2 decimal places. So, and with money, right, 2 decimal places is all we care about. So it's a good idea to go ahead and round them. Any questions on total and how that works? Nope, we got it. Cool. So deposit function. What do we need for this? We need the command deposit and we need a value. So one of the tricky things about this one is if you weren't paying attention to the bank.txt file and you didn't notice that there was a comma space, sometimes you might append in the number, and when you append in the number, that's going to cause problems, right? Because if your bank.txt file ends in, say, look, minus 25, right? I took 25 cents out, and I append $5 to it. Well, now I have minus 25 cents and then a 5 at the end, so minus 255, right? And that's, 1, not a valid cents value because it's more than 2 digits, and 2, it's not what you wanted. You wanted to add $5. So you'd go ahead and you'd run your total, and your total would be wacky. It would be probably the same, depending on how the rounding worked, maybe a cent less than you thought. And you're like, that's really weird. I don't know why I got that. So you have to make sure that you're paying attention to those delimiters when you're appending to a file, a character file, and maybe it is a list of something. Be very careful about how you're appending things. So if that doesn't work, it's a bummer. We'll console log it. Otherwise, we're good. We say what value it is that we appended into the file. So that's the deposit. Pretty simple with the append file, right? Does anyone have any questions on that? Now withdraw. So again, we're going to go ahead and use the append file, but we're going to be a little bit trickier with it, right? So we have to have the withdraw command and then a value again. If we want to withdraw 25 cents, well, you wouldn't say that you wanted to withdraw negative 25 cents, right? That'd be kind of weird. And you wouldn't say that you wanted to deposit negative 25 cents to take 25 cents out. So semantically, we want to say we want to withdraw 25 cents. That's kind of the natural way to say it. And so to guarantee that our results come back with the proper amounts, we need to take 25 cents from the account, right? So not only do we append the comma and space to make sure it's delimited properly, we should also append a minus sign before our value to guarantee that it's a negative number and it's going to be deducting from the actual total. And then same with the deposited. If there's a problem, we say that there's a problem. Otherwise, we go ahead and notify the user of what they withdrew. Any questions on that one? Cool. And lastly, the lotto. This one was a fun one, right? You'll either lose 25 cents, and that's it, or you'll also win $2, and so I guess it's a net of 175, right? So we run lotto. First thing we got to do is we got to subtract 25 cents. So what do? We append file, and we do pretty much our withdraw function, except we're actually hard coding 25 cents, right? We minus 25 cents, and then we're going to go ahead and get our chance using a math random. Does everyone remember the math random and how we use that? We're just generating a random number, determining what it is. If it's 1, then guess what? You win. Otherwise, you just lost money. When you win, we're going to go ahead and again do our append file like we would our deposit. Except we're going to hard code $2 in. Result increased by 2. And we'll say you won the lottery. Otherwise, we're going to say you just lost 25 cents. That sucks. Don't play the lottery. Okay, any questions on the lotto? I know this one's a bit more complicated, the lotto. You have a question? You could do it in another function, but they do it right here at the top. Take away 25 cents before you do anything else, right? Okay. Any more questions on this before we move on? Because we're about to move on. Oh, alrighty. I'm going to pull up the next example. So we're going to go into request. We're going to use this request library. I'm not going to go over it very much at first. First, I kind of want to show you what happens. So we're just going to try to run it, see how it works out. So you just do node and our request.js, and get an error. Does anyone know what that error means?
Do you not have the package?
It's not that we're not in the right file, but that's close. It's that we don't have the package.
The module?
Yeah, we don't have the module request. Now with FS, we never get this error, right? Because
It's a built-in.
it's built into Node, exactly.
Yeah, but now you have to go to npm to download it.
Now we have to go to npm. How do we npm
Would be this npm install require
request?
or request.
npm install request. That's exactly right. I'm just doing it to show you. You don't need to do this. We have another activity after I show this and go over it. So now let's go ahead and try to run it again. Stuff back. So it worked. Great. So that's the kind of error you're going to see if you go ahead and try to run Node code, like maybe you downloaded someone's project, they have a package JSON or whatever, without installing anything. You get this weird error, cannot find module, whatever. Remember, it has to be installed in the directory itself. So now have a node modules folder here, and in there will be requests somewhere. And these are all the dependencies that request has, and there's a lot there. And now it knows it can use that request module to get stuff done. But that's going to happen a lot. It happens all the time. I mean, it's just something you forget. Oh, I forgot to install this stuff. No problem. You've got to remember that that's what that error means. Okay. So our response that we got back. That look familiar to everyone? I know it's kind of hard to see it. It's not formatted well. It's some Wikipedia HTML, right? So there's some comments. We can read those, right? Let's go over them, though. The request function, something we want to get. It's going to make a request out to whatever that URL is and bring us back some info. All right? This is just your GET request. Does everyone know what a GET request is? Anyone familiar with that? It's like when you go to a web page, right? And we want to see the content of the web page, so we enter in our URL bar, right? Our address bar at the top of our browser makes what's called a GET request to this URL in our browser ourselves. We would get the same content, except for our browsers would render it because it knows how to render HTML, right? So we get some stuff back. We get all this HTML, this crazy blob. Like most functions that we've seen so far, the append file, the read file, we have a callback function here. It has 3 parameters as opposed to 1 or 2. It has error, response, and body. Okay. What was that? Could you repeat the question?
I said, did you not get a response because it was just a static web page?
Oh, I got a response back. So the error, you know, is like what we've done. If you have an error, console log out. We didn't get an error because we saw the JavaScript that came back, right? And we have an if check right here to say if there's not an error, and then response. So this response object we did get back because we have to check it to verify that it came back as a 200. Does anyone know off the top of their head what a 200 HTTP status code is?
All good.
All good. It means okay. Exactly. You get into that more as you do React and stuff, so it might be a little early for that. But the response data that comes back from request is basically just information about the request you made. So all the stuff that you don't see as a user of, you know, the web from your browser, but you will see when you start using Express, you start using React, and you start building all these servers yourself. It's stuff like your status code, 200, 404, you know, those are a few that we're used to, 403s, 401s, 400s, you know, 500, 502 bad gateway, all this crazy stuff, right? It has status messages, something went wrong. It has other information about basically the transaction you made. UP spec, you know, we can go look it up, find everything we'd find in there. And pretty much there's this other parameter called body. Return whatever you set out to get. So in the case of reaching a random web page like on Wikipedia, I'm going to get a big blob of HTML out. And what's actually kind of fun, and I think you'll do this in a later exercise, is you can do something like this, a request, get this blob of HTML, and I can actually send it to my own web page that I'm hosting with Node and render that page like you run Wikipedia. It's depending on what Wikipedia's headers are. They might have static assets that might be hard to get to, but most likely it'll just come in and look great, right? So if we went out to a JSON endpoint and we're making a request to an API that had a JSON endpoint, we'd get JSON back for our body. If it was XML, we get XML back for our body. So it's just the payload that came from making that request with the request library. So I know there's kind of a lot rolled into this. We may not totally understand requests and everything that's happening with HTTP, but do we have a general idea of what this request library is doing, right? It's going out to a website, bringing us back some stuff. The response is a good thing to check because you can check the status codes if things are okay. You may or may not have to do that, but it's usually a good thing to remember to check. And then the body is our payload. It's what we want, right? Question?
So in this specific case, content of the body is going to be a big block of essentially raw HTML code.
It's literally what it is. It's just a big block of HTML. Now remember, when we go to any web page, your browser is actually getting that same big block of HTML.
And it just knows what to do with it.
It knows what to do with it. Yep, this is just like, here's some stuff. Yes, so in JavaScript, all parameters, you can name them whatever you want. It's the position that matters, right?
Okay.
So the first position, you could call it body, but it's going to be an error. So it'd be kind of weird to do that. And one thing, I don't know if JJ's covered it, but you'll see in a lot of these callbacks, the first parameter is always an error. It's best practice in Node.js when you have callbacks. First parameter is an error. Second parameter is like response data. Yeah, it's your data, right? Having 3 parameters, yes, no. I mean, it depends on what you consider to be like true node responses, but it's usually not a big deal as long as the first one's an error, right? So that's the request library, and we're going to use that in our next activity. Anyone have any more questions on request and how all this works? Cool. I'm going to go ahead and show you really quick the next activity. Let me just pull it up. All right, let me get it. So this is going to be a similar one to request. And you guys are going to do something very similar for your next activity, is what I've got. So the last one we did a request to Wikipedia. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. We're just literally going to Wikipedia like we would in our browser and getting some HTML back. Now we're going to make a specific request to an API that has a cool endpoint. And in this one, we're going to make a request to the database that IMDb uses to show all its data. So it's the OMDB API, okay? And there's all kinds of cool things about this. But you'll notice there's a few things we can break down in the URL and in the request package. So I've already installed requests. We know how that works now. You install with npm install. There'll be package.json, whatever, and we get it in there. We require it in. And again, here you can see it's called request because the package is called request. So that's practice. We like to do that. We'll go ahead and request this crazy long URL right here. And it looks like a mouthful, looks like a bunch of just a jumble, right? But it's really not. There's actually a lot to it. And there's some resources you can use to figure out what these are. But the first thing to look at is right here, http://www.omdapi.com. That's the website we're going to have to hit, right? .org or whatever, not too different from that, omdbapi.com. Now after this question mark is where things get fun, okay? T equals remember plus the plus Titans. Can anyone guess what T means? Title, exactly. So we want to search for the title of the movie, and in this movie we want to get info about Remember the Titans. Then we have an ampersand, okay? Y equals ampersand plot equals short, ampersand API key equals trilogy. Now the Y equals is probably just it's either like a query. I didn't have time to look at the exact meaning of it. It's either a query or it's basically setting up what's coming out next, but it's empty. And then we have right here ampersand plot. So we're saying what kind of plot we want. We want a short plot, and then we want this API key, ampersand API key. So a lot of times when you're making requests out to an API, you have to provide some sort of a key or some sort of way to say that you're an authenticated real user that wants to come in and get information back, right? And Trilogy has one set up for us called Trilogy. It's nice and easy. So again, like the last request, we have an error responsive body that are going to come back. If the request was successful, meaning we don't have an error and the status code is 200, we can go ahead and we can do this crazy JSON parse, and then we can get an IMDb rating out of assumably some JavaScript object, right? So this one's a little different because the Wikipedia, we just did a console log on the body and we got a bunch of HTML junk, right? But if I run this one right here, you can see I already ran it once. I get this movie's rating is 7.8. Does anyone know what JSON parse does and why we need it? So yeah, exactly.
You
That's
could do an
exactly right.
XML parse too, right?
I don't know if
but like that's the only other way
you could parse XML. I don't know if it's built in like JSON is, but yes, when you call out to an API and it's returning JSON, it returns it as a string because it's encoded as a string over the internet. And then we do a JSON parse of that body, that response, to turn it into a JavaScript object, right? And then we can use it like any old object. And that's what we have. We have this IMDb rating. We're just going to console log that out. So our next activity is we're going to be doing something similar to this, where we're going to be calling out to the OMDB API, and we're going to be using this API key and stuff. We have some of that built into the instructions for you, and you're going to get some information back about a movie. So if the TAs could slack out the instructions for the OMDB request activity, you have about 20 and 25 minutes to work on this. Any questions on this OMDB API before we get started on the activity? It's going to be very similar to this. Yeah.
What is that character actor status code? Can that the 200?
Oh, yeah. This crazy character.
Oh, is it a triple equal?
That is a triple equal. Sorry, I have an extension or a font called Code, and the extension takes certain symbols like not equals equals and turns it into like the mathematical looking version of it. So it does make it a little confusing. Sorry about that. But yeah, that's the triple equals. All right, any other questions? All right, let's get started on the last activity. And you can do this as partners too. So you can collaborate. No need to work by yourself. This one's kind of tough.
It's Jason stuff. It's like I'm assuming that's Kind of issue with the homework. But no. I just basically work on so I just created this in a separate, to just do it at first, I just created it in a separate. So I was able to add it into. We're getting more.
So don't we want to?
Well, I would, with this, I would want to. So we're doing. Who would I do? Who would I decide this for? Still working. Yeah. All right, so if I just go here. Is that the way? Okay, sorry. Well, we can also say that, so then we go here.
Is the request asynchronous?
Yeah.
Is the request AC? So there's the callback is AC.
So all that asynchronous.
Right. All right, so. Yeah, do. Okay, so do it now. Yeah. Just say right here. So this also works. This all works. This is what oh, yeah. All right, so I go, this is the, so, all right, so the game.
That's the.
Oh, yeah, this is right. This is the start. Yeah, it works. Okay, so I've even upward, this is the
Object.
because I accidentally switched one of mine. Getting on there. I actually didn't use the dots on myself.
Okay, so.
Dot getting, or yeah.
Go ahead and search whatever you're. I'm not by any time. So.
when I first pushed it, I just didn't want to buy it. So it didn't read it.
So,
Would that make my October? Okay. I would actually just delete.
It's gonna have this finger.
So now I have no
So, I can see it is. Sitting your console.
Okay, and I still have like
Do you offset, like,
oh, there's footers. I'm missing out. Oh no, it's not really. Okay, cool. Awesome.
yeah, we can like update it to make it yeah.
Yeah, the problem was I just didn't. Yeah. Okay. All right. Same with this game. Is that what that means?
Actually, you know what? Let's remove some.
Okay. Cool. And then when I get later today, I pushed the.
Uncommon.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have something like that. All right, so if I do this, well, it's still there. Well, it's going to sound like a reading. All right.
Sure. The one we do.
And then should add them together. Why did we decide to do the entity ring?
And then.
Yeah, I guess so. So after you get over
It's just we.
I think you guys have.
Oh.
All right, cool, awesome. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
Should be one.
This is a little information about.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't hear. Oh, the challenge. Yeah, so like. Was there enough time to do this? 'Cause yeah, it's a very different way to do that. So that's a creative.
You mean? Oh, actually, so that only goes out like.
And then,
But I think it's.
Okay. So
Go back to.
So I have it all at first and then that's good.
Yeah, so if you don't have any you have some questions. So, yeah.
how would we add all three of the words you typed together? How would you just add all three? That is.
Yeah, it's a big, like, I think it's types of I just want
Everything out.
Now, three actually. Yeah, that's the read. So it's gonna be Vector.js, the text file, then the faucet.
I understand.
So FS is.
I don't know.
So remember in site document. So we have to save it. So we have and then you say NCR school and this is
Oh, okay. Are there multiple things that we
Did you guys get it? Oh, okay. All right.
and then this.
So did you guys do the request? I just do like the extra thing of like being able to write it. You can just like create a movie, add to it. Give me like a more than 2 word movie. So, yeah, we didn't even do that. You gotta do that, install request. Did you do that already? Okay, let me look at your package.
So when I see that, am I gonna?
Over here, I'll show you.
So
You should have, you didn't, you should have a package. What folder, yeah.
Okay, so we see now.
Yeah, request. All right, so in here, did you require it anywhere? Or you have it right here? So request, the movie name, just add, just right now. Yeah. Oh, did you do the Ajax thing on your own? Well, try just just add like the movie name right now. No, just comment out. Yeah, just the whole thing. Or no, yeah, just all. Just add in where it says request. Yeah, just comment it all. Like all of it. Because you're gonna want to do it after the yeah, actually. Now you can do so request is gonna handle that data. You don't have to use the dollar sign. I don't even know if the dollar sign is actually working this because you have yeah.
All right, let's go over this assignment. Did anyone finish this? This one was really tough. You finished it? Nice. It's awesome. Solid work. This one is really hard.
No, just air.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a word title, just maybe one word to keep it simple, right? We're going to go ahead and try to retrieve the year that it was created. Okay? So, line by line, we need request first, okay? We got to use it to somehow query that API. Next thing we need to do is what? We grab that movie name off the command line, your process argv. From there, we can start to build this dynamic query URL, right? So one thing that the example did was it had remember the Titans in the query already for you. But in this case, we want to build it based off of user input. So this is the less involved example because you only want to use one word, right? So one word's easy. Remember the Titans had pluses in it and it was a little bit more complex. But one word, we can just try to put one word in there and see if we can build the dynamic URL in a little bit simpler manner, right? So all we're doing is taking that movie name we grabbed out of the command line, right? The process argv index 2. We're just inserting it right after the T parameter in that URL. Right where we saw remember the Titans before, we're just, boom, putting our new movie name in. So we've built the URL. We're going to request. We're going to just console log it out to make sure it looks good. It's a good practice while you're building code the first time, maybe not before you release code, but while you're building it to console log a bunch of stuff. Like console log everywhere, you're going to need it. If you don't know how to set up the debugger properly, console logs are your next best thing, right? They help you see what's going on. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and make that request. So we're going to plug in our query URL right here. Our 3 parameters, again, error, response, and body. If there's not an error and we have an OK status code of 200, we're going to go ahead and we're going to display the year it was released by looking for .year on the JSON object. Remember, we've got to do JSON parse because it comes in as a string. We want to turn it into an object, and then we're going to get the year. Now, what's a trick you could use if you didn't know what the syntax if you didn't know what the syntax of this object was that you were JSON parsing, how could you get it?
Parse based on, just do the JSON.parse body, nothing else, and then just log everything.
And console log everything.
Yeah.
Right. That's a great way to do it. If you don't know what data is coming back in JavaScript, which, to be honest, is most of the time you work with something new, you have no idea what it is. Sometimes something you even know, like it might change, and something new comes in, you just have no idea.
We'll even know when to capitalize the
Capitalize year, that's a great thing. You could guess .year.
If I didn't console log the body first.
Right. You could guess .year, which you'd be right, it's .year, but capital, capitalization matters.
Lowercase didn't work, so I had to go back.
Exactly. So very good reason, very good way to kind of see what you're working with, right? Does this all make sense? Does anyone have questions on this one? We see how we kind of did, the cool thing about this one is we did the dynamic query URL, right? We didn't just use the static one. We let the user decide what they wanted to see. And we can actually test it. We can do node. Level 1. Oops, caps. And released in 2015. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and look at the level 2, or the little bit more challenging, where you have multiple words. Okay, so everything starts the same, sort of, except for instead of getting the movie name directly out of our process argv array, our command line input parameters array, we're going to store it as an array. Because we know we have an array, we want that array, we got to do something with it. Because remember, every time we have a space between a command, when we're executing a command on the command line, they come in as different indices on this array. So one after another, right? So the first thing we can do is create a movie name variable, but we're going to go ahead and leave it blank. We're going to leave it blank, so we, 1, determine it's a string just from the get-go. It's a blank string, okay? So we know we're going to be using it as a string. And 2, if we put something in there, well, it's not going to be the title that the user asked for. The next thing we can do is go ahead and loop through that array of command line parameters, except for there's a little caveat. And remember, when we grab the movie name out or whatever you want, you always have to start from the second index, or the third element, index number 2, right? So we have to start there too when we're going through this array to get our parameters. If we started at 0, you get some weird stuff out, right? You get node, you get your file, and then you get your movie title. And that's not quite a movie that I've heard of. So I less than the length, right? So we want to traverse the rest of the array from starting at the second index all the way through, but we don't want to go too far, because if we do, we'll get a bunch of crazy errors. And then your typical for loop syntax here, where you just do the I++, the increment. So there's one little trick here. We can add all of these things together to the movie name, and that's relatively easy, right? You can use plus equals, and you can just add the string. It's not that hard to do. It's sometimes hard to remember exactly how to do it, but that alone isn't that difficult. However, we have a little trick where we have to have the pluses where the spaces used to exist. And there's 2 scenarios that can cause a problem. One, you just blindly add a plus before each word. Well, now you have a plus starting your title, and that's not the title. Or 2, you add a plus blindly after every word, and then you have a plus at the end of the title, and that's, again, not the title. So you kind of have to think about that when you're appending them and come up with either one or the other. Do you want to add the plus before the name, or do you want to add the plus after the name? And then you have to decide how to handle that. In this case, if I is greater than 2 and I is less than the length, we're going to go ahead and add a plus in, right? So that means after the first one, so we're going to go ahead and add the first one in, no problem. After that, we need to add a plus before we add the next word. And what that does is creates the full movie title, the movie name, right, with pluses injected to the spaces. The other way you could do it is to check if anything has been added to movie name. And if nothing's been added to movie name, we're not going to add a plus. The next time you come through, if something's been added to movie name, we can add the plus before we add the word, right? Does everyone get that? Get why we had to do those checks, why they're important? This kind of logic, it seems kind of trivial here, like, oh, yeah, we just add a plus with a space. And it seems like, okay, a little bit of thinking, a little bit of work, and I can figure it out. It's deceptively going to bite you later. This happens all the time where you're like, I have a list of stuff, I have to add them together. There's some little caveat like this. So it's a really good exercise for getting you ready for the code you'll write in the real world, where you're going to have an exercise like this and you might forget to append something before or after. You might accidentally append an extra. Happens all the time. So it's a nice little exercise to see here. Again, we're going to go ahead and build that query URL. Now, this is all the same, right? We have the movie name properly built with the pluses. And then we're going to console it out so we see it. That's all cool. And then the rest here is the same. Use a query URL. We'll get our response back, an error response to body. Check if it's all good. If it's good, we'll console log it. Any questions on this one? A little bit more involved, right? We had a little bit more work to do with that title because the title was longer. Go ahead and try to run it. Level 2. And I can do forest dump. Is forest have 2 T's? I don't know. We'll find out, won't we? Nope. Cool. So you can see right there where console log the URL out, forest plus dump. It works. We're good. Then we got the URL. Any questions on this? TAs, if you could Slack out the solved version for everyone to see, that'd be awesome. Cool. So there's one last thing. We have a little bit of time. We'll just talk about it briefly. It's kind of like extra material we can go over. You don't have an activity related to it. It's between synchronous and asynchronous code. Now, when we were doing that last exercise, I was asked the question, hey, is the request library asynchronous? And the answer is yes. How can you tell? Well, there's an easy way to tell in JavaScript, in Node specifically, and that is if there's a callback, and you're required to use the callback to access the output of some function, like request, where you get a response back and some data, it's asynchronous. If for some reason they use the callback and it's not, I don't know why they did that, but you could. However, you can pretty much guess if that's the case, it's asynchronous. Does anyone, off the top of their head, know the difference between asynchronous and synchronous? In general.
Asynchronous is if we wanted to wait for an answer and then move on to the next.
So that's Synchronous is blocking. Yeah, that's a more technical way to say it. But yeah, you're right. When you have asynchronous, you can do multiple things at once. It's like allowing you to almost do things in parallel. Now, there's a difference between parallel processing and asynchronous. That's kind of a technical distinction. But asynchronous means you call out to something. You say, I want this thing to happen. Done. And until that thing is done, you don't have to worry about it anymore, right? With synchronous code, say an example, a trivial but true example of synchronous code is when I set a variable, right? Can I do any other instructions between the time I say x equals 5, or do I just have to wait for x to equal 5? It's synchronous code. Now, it's not very important synchronous code because it doesn't really block anything assigning a variable. But you can imagine if you're appending a file, and a large file, and you do it in a synchronous fashion, like you can with append file sync as opposed to regular append file, maybe it takes a really long time. And when that happens, you could be waiting. Your JavaScript can't do anything if it's a synchronous call and it takes a long time because it'll literally wait here. Now, this function looks a lot simpler, right? There's no callback. There's not a bunch of weird stuff coming into if it happened or not. And if there was a return value, like say you were reading the file, you can immediately get to it, just like normal code, right? But you still have to wait. And that's kind of the bummer. And this is one of the things that makes Node really nice is it's all built around this asynchronous paradigm where you don't have to wait. So I'll show you the asynchronous code. Now, we've already seen asynchronous append file because we all used it, right? So again, we have read file, the function, error data right there, that callback. And then append file also has a callback, the synchronous one. Read file, for some reason, they're doing read file asynchronously here instead of synchronously. But we have the asynchronous read file. And then in that callback, we can call fs append file sync. In the callback, again, we're calling fs append file. But notice there's one key difference. Fs append file sync doesn't have any errors or anything. It doesn't have that callback. And fs append file, the true asynchronous one, we do have to worry about that callback and if an error comes through and what could potentially happen. And we can't move forward with the rest of our code until that's done, but we could do other stuff, right? We could do other stuff while we're waiting for that callback to call. So an interesting question to ask is, in this scenario where we have the synchronous code, let's look at the synchronous code. Log saved after our async, our sync, append file sync is called, we have two console logs. Console log saved and console log second number. In what order are those going to be? We call append file sync. We should see saved in the console, and then the second number, which in the console, right? That's how we all just envision it's going to happen, and that's right. If we run it, it failed. I might be missing a file that it needs. Yep. Oh, I didn't give it a file. Look at that. So let me just create a file really quick. .txt, and I'm going to echo some stuff into it, some garbage. Let's go ahead and read this. Txt. Number 0, print 0. We see saved. And we see 2. Okay. Number, which is 0. Console log saved. And this number right here. Now here's a weird thing. Let's look back here. Number 0. So 0 prints right here, and number 0 prints right here. It ended up printing in order, and that's cool. Okay, great, printed in order. That's what we expect. However, there is a case because this read file is asynchronous that 0 could actually print number 0. If we run the async version, what do we get? 0, 5, and saved. Now, that looks different, doesn't it? In the first synchronous, we had saved and then 2. Now, if I look at the code for async append, structure, saved technically comes before the second 0, right? comes before the second number. Really weird that saved is actually called after it. A little peculiar. That's because this is a true representation of how asynchronous code works. Technically, what's happening in the second example is we're calling fs.append file, right? It's doing its thing. It doesn't do anything with this callback, but it calls the second number, which is 0. So console log 0. Then the append file says, hey, I'm done. The node library is under, underneath the hood. They say, hey, I'm done JavaScript. Here's a callback with some information. And it goes ahead and it'll console log the second number out, which is 5, and then saved. So if you think about it chronologically and how you see it in your file, it should be. It's not that it's hoisted. It's that it's the asynchronous code calling in a different order than you would expect logically. So we have 005 saved. If we look at how the code is chronologically, I would expect it to be 5 saved 00, probably. But we're getting 5 and saved absolutely last after both zeros because fs append file is synchronous, asynchronous. Whereas the synchronous version number, which is 0, and then we're going to get saved in the second number exactly as I'd expect it. So it's going to be 0 saved 2 every time without change. Personally, I think this example that Trilogy gave us is a little bit contrived, and the numbers they gave don't really show it very well. But the concept that the fs append file here, this function that's being called happens after you would expect at a different time. And the weird thing about it is you don't know when that is going to be, right? You cannot put like a timer or anything to guess when it's going to be because you have literally no idea. The operating system is totally in charge of it. It's really hard to kind of wrap your head around that concept. And I don't expect anyone to walk away from this little talk that I'm giving and go, oh yeah, asynchronous code, I know exactly how it works. And all that stuff, because you probably won't. It takes a long time. But important notes are, 1, if you have a callback as your last parameter of any function, you can guarantee that it's probably asynchronous, right? You can guarantee that it's asynchronous. I say probably because someone could write a weird API that doesn't, but you can think about it as asynchronous. It's safe to do that. 2, if it's asynchronous, you have no idea when that callback is going to execute, so don't bank on it. So those are really important things to remember when you have asynchronous code. You cannot know when it's going to finish, so don't worry about it. Like, just do something else while you're waiting, or do nothing, and handle the results when they come in at the time they come in. Everything in here, we have to use this closure and this function to get things done. Okay? So a little confusing, I know. The TAs will slack this out so you can look at it again on your own time. Try to digest it. It's going to take a lot of time to really build the intuition, but you're going to be working with a ton of asynchronous code in Node from now on. So you will get it. It just takes a little bit of time. Other than that, y'all good to go. Enjoy your Saturday and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks for bearing with me. I had to fill in last minute, so it was a little rough.
Okay.